Hi, it's Dwyer, gamblersadvisory.com, a free site, bettingangle.us, a free site. Today is April the 10th, 2020. Let's talk boxing. I'm just going to riff a little bit without notes on some boxing stories that I noticed recently, right? Lennox Lewis, who I think the world of, who I think is historically undervalued, who I think is one of the reference point heavyweights in history. In other words, you look at him and you say, who's the best of this era? And Lennox Lewis's name is there, right? Lennox Lewis gave an interview where he was asked about his toughest opponent. So Lewis, who's one of boxing's better interviews, who views himself as an ambassador of the sport, who shows incredible patience to me when he's interviewing some Johnny-come-lately heavyweight who doesn't have his skill level. And Lewis is there politely hearing this guy opine about the nuances of the sport. Right? Lennox Lewis said that his toughest fight was against Ray Mercer. Understand, there are many people who believe he lost to Ray Mercer. Right? Ray Mercer at one point won the WBO heavyweight title. Had they scored that fight differently, and one of the outfits, well, first off, a judge actually had Ray Mercer winning that fight. Right? Lewis wins a majority decision. Also, one of the reporting outfits, I believe it's Associated Press or something like that, had Ray Mercer winning the fight. That fight was a close fight. Lewis couldn't dictate the fight with his jab. I thought Lewis's answer was a heartfelt, honest answer. He obviously remembers the Ray Mercer fight. But then he went further. And he said that the best opponent he faced was Evander Holyfield. Right now, Holyfield certainly held his own against great opponents. Right? He fights Lennox Lewis twice, doesn't get knocked down. Right? Surviving 24 rounds with Lennox Lewis is a hell of an achievement. He fights Mike Tyson twice. He beats Mike Tyson twice. I thought he should have won the crown when he fought Nikolai Valuev. I thought he won that fight going away. Of course, they didn't give him the decision. This is boxing. It's part political. He fights, and history needs to remember this guy, Riddick Bowe 3 times. He wins the Fan Man fight, the middle fight. Right? So Lennox Lewis had his share of fights against tough opposition and held his own. Right? The only time I saw Lennox Lewis truly get worked in a fight is his fight against James Toney. But viewers here need to realize that I consider Toney to be a Hall of Famer. Toney's one of the best counterpunchers I've ever seen. So that was a high-level fight. But I'm going to just throw out another name, because I didn't think either Evander Holyfield fight tested Lennox Lewis as much as his fight against another reference point heavyweight, one of the best heavyweights of the last 30 years. Right? I'm serious when I say that. I thought this fight was one of Lewis's toughest fights. I thought it was as tough as the Mercer fight. And I consider this guy to be the best opponent Lennox Lewis faced at that point in his career, right? Let me just backtrack a little bit. I think the world of Mike Tyson, but I believe Mike Tyson's heyday was in the late 1980s, right? When Lennox Lewis is picking up a gold medal in the 1988 Olympics. Mike Tyson was the heavyweight champ. He's one of the reference point champs. He was a great champ. By the time he fights Lennox Lewis, he's a shell of himself. By contrast, when Vitali Klitschko fights Lennox Lewis, right? Lewis is the champ. Vitali is the young up-and-coming fighter. And I thought that that fight is one of the biggest fights in heavyweight history. Understand, for me, the last 30 years in the heavyweight division, right, comes down to three fighters. We'll call them the three best, right? My own personal list. In the comment section of this video, you put down your list, right? But let's just say, in the era after Mike Tyson goes to jail, right? Let's say the post-Tyson Buster Douglas era. In that era, to me, the top three heavyweights are, and I'm not ranking them, I'm just saying this is the short list: Lennox Lewis, Vitali Klitschko, and Tyson Fury. Right? Those are the three guys who I think of as, wow, the most skilled. Right? Now, I'm not saying those guys didn't have problems. Lennox Lewis clearly had a problem motivating himself. Doesn't look like he had much of a training camp before that first Hasim Rahman fight. Also, there's an open question on whether Lennox Lewis ever beat a mentally fit Oliver McCall. Understand, McCall drops him, stops him, right? Gets the stoppage the first time they fight. Then the second time they fight, McCall's having all kinds of problems outside the ring, right? He's busted for crack cocaine and a bunch of other stuff, right? McCall himself would later be committed. In that fight, McCall's in front of Lennox Lewis, and McCall seems to have a mental breakdown. I don't consider that fight to be a proper revenge match. And, of course, the Ray Mercer fight, right? Lennox may well have lost that fight, right? Great fighters seem to always have that one fight that got away from them. He escaped with the decision, just like Floyd Mayweather escaped with the decision against, I believe it was Castillo, just like Rocky Marciano escaped with the decision in his first fight against Roland Lastarza. Lennox Lewis escapes that first, well, let's just say Lewis escapes his fight against Ray Mercer, doesn't give Mercer a rematch. So I'm not saying that Lennox Lewis was unbeatable, right? Vitali Klitschko is winning against Chris Byrd. Chris Byrd, one of the masters defensively in the sport over the last 30 years. Klitschko then throws out a shoulder and panics. All he had to do, in my opinion, was stay on his feet toward the end of the fight, right? Move away, throw some jabs with your good hand. You know, cover up. Chris Byrd wasn't the hardest puncher in the world. I believe Vitali Klitschko has a mental breakdown in that fight. Loses his title, loses the fight. And of course, Tyson Fury, let's face it, he's had his ups and downs. Beats Vladimir Klitschko. I believe everyone would realize he is a significant heavyweight if he just kept his sanity. If he just lived a serious boxer's life. Right? He has the rematch against Vladimir Klitschko. I thought he would have won that. The first fight is not as close as the scorecard suggests. Right? He falls apart. Then, of course, he comes back into the sport, and we'll all have to wonder what he was thinking in the 12th round of his first fight against Deontay Wilder. Understand, he's dominating the fight. He gets dropped in the 9th round. So he knows Wilder has a punch. Right? He knows Wilder could knock me down. It's happened already. So then he comes out for the 12th round. Understand, he had to be up by 2 rounds on the judges' scorecards. And he's curiously hanging around Deontay Wilder. What I want people to do is to look at the first knockdown. Ask yourself, look at the knockdown in the 12th round. Just ask yourself, where are his hands? What are his hands doing so low against one of history's highest KO percentages? Right? So understand, I'm not here saying that all 3 heavyweights are bulletproof. Right? Like most careers, they've had their ups and downs. But I believe those are the 3 best heavyweights of the post-Buster Douglas, Mike Tyson era. Right? And I'll just say, if you want a classic fight, and I know Lewis, claims the best opponent he had was Evander Holyfield. Right? I get it. But if you want to see a classic fight that really doesn't get the glamour it deserves, I want you to look at Lewis's last fight. He retires after this fight. His last fight, it's a classic against Vitali Klitschko. My interpretation of the film of this fight is that Vitali Klitschko comes out and starts working Lennox Lewis. Right? He's countering Lennox Lewis. He's even landing straight right hands on Lennox Lewis, who, of course, looks like he didn't train seriously for the fight. Lewis was supposed to fight Kirk Johnson. Johnson then couldn't do it. So, Klitschko, who was supposed to be on the Kirk Johnson undercard, then steps in to fight Lennox Lewis. Lewis looks completely unprepared for him. Right? Completely unprepared. Is losing his title after 3 rounds. Right? Vitali Klitschko, because of his height, because of his game, was one of the few fighters who could literally stand in the pocket with Lennox Lewis. In other words, Lewis throws shots, Vitali is leaning backward. Vitali then is able to counter Lewis quickly because he's close to Lewis. Now, I don't know what was said in Lewis's corner. Understand, like Tyson Fury now, Lewis had a Kronk Gym guy in his corner. In fact, the head of the Kronk Gym, Emmanuel Stewart. Lewis starts looping his punches. If you're into adjustments, it's one of the best adjustments in several years in big heavyweight title fights. Lewis starts looping his punches. Vitali, who's great defensively, but who was precise defensively. In other words, he would see you throwing a punch, Vitali would catch punches on his forearm. But here, Vitali couldn't figure out the change of angle. So Lewis starts to make a comeback in the fight. You don't know what's going to happen the second half of the fight, but what you knew is that Lewis was able to cut Vitali Klitschko. These are those freak moments in boxing that could happen on any punch. Vitali, who wasn't a bleeder, suddenly has a bad cut, the worst cut of his career. The blood's flowing into his eye. Right? The cut then looks bad. There's urgency. What I want people to realize is that fight takes place in Los Angeles. Right? The crowd, LA is a cult town. They love to root for favorites. Right? Lennox Lewis was the known fighter. Understand, Vitali got tossed off his own Olympic team for failing a PED test. His younger brother then took his place in 1996, and that's how Vladimir Klitschko wins the gold medal at the Olympics. Vitali was relatively unknown. He even fooled around in kickboxing at the time. I'm just telling you that by the start of the fourth round, the LA crowd, who didn't even know who Vitali Klitschko was cheering for the underdog. You were watching this fight, and it's a real-life Rocky film. Right? Vitali is mounting the most serious challenge to Lennox Lewis since not the Evander Holyfield fights. Right? Lewis won both of those fights, by the way. I know they call the first one a draw. Lewis got jobbed in that first one. Right? No, this was the most serious test of Lennox Lewis since Ray Mercer. Let me say this. I know he loses the first Hasim Rahman fight. Let's be real. That's a one-punch KO. Lewis is not being systematically deconstructed by the opponent in that fight. He was being systematically deconstructed by Vitali Klitschko, who's unbeaten at the time. So then Lewis makes the adjustment, but you understood. Just looking at the guys, Lewis is huffing and puffing in that fight. You understood. Vitali was the younger man. Vitali, who looks to be barely breathing, was the guy who looked like he was in shape. Well, Lewis opens up the cut. The cut is bad. The referee, who clearly wasn't the referee in the Tyson Fury Otto Wallin fight, which featured a similar cut, that referee stopped the fight. Lewis retires. If you're looking for a great Lennox Lewis fight in which he's tested significantly, and if you've already seen the Ray Mercer Lennox Lewis fight, my advice to you is to take a look at his fight against Vitali Klitschko. Folks, that was a classic. Let me say this too. In boxing, you have hyped up fights. And then you have these fights. Think Joshua, Andy Ruiz, the first fight. You have these fights that people overlook. They think it's just going to be the champion walking over an opponent. They barely know the opponent. I'm just telling you that it's on those nights that history is made in boxing. Right? That Lennox Lewis-Vitali Klitschko fight is a reference point. It's one of the major fights in heavyweight history. Understand. Vitali Klitschko then goes on his own reign. Right? He later becomes champ, and he's the best heavyweight in the world for several years. When his younger brother loses to Corey Sanders, right? Vladimir never fights Corey again. No, you know who gets revenge? Big Brother. You want to see a different talent level. Compare and contrast Little Brother's fight against Corey Sanders to Vitali Klitschko's fight against Corey Sanders. Let me just say this. Vladimir Klitschko had to retool his game after the Corey Sanders loss. Let's remember, he doesn't make the third round. So he goes and gets, believe it or not, the guy who was in Lennox Lewis's corner the night Lennox Lewis beats Big Brother. Let me also say this too. Let's just imagine great matchups. Now, Tyson Fury, and I understand there are many of you who consider him a joke, who believe that the reason Deontay Wilder lost was because his costume weighed 40 pounds and his legs weren't right and he had an off night. I know there are many of you who feel that, you know, if Anthony Joshua fights Tyson Fury, Joshua's going to beat Fury. I understand many people doubt Tyson Fury. And let me just say, I myself believe that Otto Wallin should have been awarded the heavyweight title, because that fight, the Fury-Wallin fight, should have been stopped on cuts. right? I'm not saying Violence better than Fury. I think Fury's one of the three best heavyweights of the last 3 decades. But I'm just saying that cut was so bad, I don't know what the referee was looking at, right? They would go to Fury's quarter. Then 10 seconds into the next round, the cut was gushing again. I don't, but let me just say this. Of the three guys, Lewis, Vitali, and Tyson Fury, Fury clearly has the best feet. Right? He clearly has the best feet. One of the fights we'll see in heaven will be prime Lennox Lewis against Tyson Fury. I'll just say this. I don't know if Tyson Fury would be able to stay outside against the Lennox Lewis who beat Michael Grant. Right? If you're looking for a prime Lewis fight, Lewis, when he was on his front foot, Andrew Galata, right? When Lewis was determined to cut off the ring on you, and keep in mind, Lewis had a back foot game. You saw that in fights like a David Tua fight. But when Lewis was on his front foot, throwing caution to the wind, he was incredibly hard to beat. Now, Lewis hit harder than Tyson Fury. Fury, to me, is the better boxer. He's the better mover. Right? The question with a Lennox Lewis-Tyson Fury fight is the same question you would get with the Lennox Lewis-Prime Ali fight. And that's the Ali in the 60s. The Ali who beats Cleveland Williams. Right? In my opinion, he might be the best heavyweight in history. Right? The question would be, could those guys get away from Lewis on his front foot to counter him and drop him? Because, of course, there is an open question on Lewis's chin. Right? He's not just stopped cold by Hasim Rahman. Right? He's also badly hurt by Oliver McCall. Right? He's definitely stunned in the ring by Vitali Klitschko. Let me just say this. A very intriguing fight, too, would be a Vitali Klitschko Tyson Fury fight. Understand, Vitali was excellent in the pocket. Excellent in the pocket. I know Tyson Fury is as well. But Tyson Fury, let's just say I would expect Vitali to hold his own in the pocket. Let me also say that Vitali would have the punching edge on Tyson Fury. Right? That would be an intriguing fight. Now understand where I'm coming from. I haven't named some guys with some great records. Right? I don't believe right now Deontay Wilder, Anthony Joshua have the talent level of the three guys I've just named. Right? Evander Holyfield had a certain fight style. Right? Counter-puncher mover. When he went up against certain heavyweights, right? Riddick Bowe. And let's be clear here. The fight Evander's awarded is a close fight that Bowe seemed to be on the verge of taking over before the Fan Man incident. Just Google it. Right? In the third fight, Bowe leaves no doubt. He stops Evander Holyfield. Right? Now, Evander certainly could fight inside against the diminished Mike Tyson. Tyson post-prison is not 1980s level Tyson. Just like Ali. When he comes back in the 70s, isn't the Ali who beats people like Zora Fali, right? Ernie Terrell, Cleveland Williams, right? Well, let's just say Evander Holyfield, he's clearly a Hall of Famer, But I thought when you see him in the pocket against James Toney, who's so confident in that fight, that Toney starts sticking his tongue out at Evander Holyfield. I'm not kidding. Right? I don't put Evander with Lewis, Vitali, and Tyson Fury. I believe Vladimir Klitschko, who retooled his game, right? Retooled his game. People forget that he loses to Ross Purity before he loses to Corey Sanders. You look at the Sanders fight, he's leaning over his front feet. This is different than the Emmanuel Stewart version of Vladimir Klitschko, right? I think we saw that Vladimir Klitschko couldn't handle the movement, just couldn't handle the movement of Tyson Fury. Let me just say that I believe Lennox Lewis on his front foot would beat Vladimir Klitschko. I know that's controversial. Understand, the two guys had the same trainer, Emmanuel Stewart. But I just feel that Lennox Lewis is more fluid, made more adjustments in fights, could play with the angles of his punches, knew how to grab you as he was throwing punches. Look at the Michael Grant film. Right? I feel that Lennox is better than Vladimir. I feel that Vitali Klitschko would beat his younger brother. We already know Tyson Fury did. Right? Don't get me wrong, Vladimir Klitschko certainly belongs in the Hall of Fame. The reason that's important, because Vladimir is very structured, is because I believe Vladimir Klitschko's little brother, from a different mother, is Anthony Joshua. I feel Joshua, who does have big power in both hands, who does have an opportunity. He's in his early 30s, right? Like Lennox Lewis, he was an Olympic gold medalist, right? I do feel Anthony Joshua, if he adds parts to his game, could take off, especially if he beats great fighters like a Tyson Fury. But he's not there yet, right? Doesn't have the courage of a Lennox Lewis against Michael Grant. I haven't seen the fight where he just comes after a guy like Lennox Lewis went after Andrew Golota and Michael Grant. Right? I just haven't seen that fight. Doesn't move well. I know he's on his back foot against Andy Ruiz after Andy curiously gains weight between the first fight and the second fight. And let's face it, the problem with Andy, still the fastest hands in the heavyweight division, but the problem with Andy is Andy doesn't have the foot speed. Right? I'm just telling you, and I know it's anathema, but I believe Lennox Lewis moves better than him. Right? Vitali Klitschko is much better deep in the pocket, much better defensively than Anthony Joshua. I haven't seen the Vitali Klitschko fight where he gets hit in the head as many times as Joshua gets hit in the head by Andy Ruiz in their first fight. And I think in time we'll see the Tyson Fury-Anthony Joshua fight, and I'm expecting that fight to be as lopsided as Tyson Fury's win over Vladimir Klitschko. Let me just say this, though, and I don't say it lightly. Just like Lennox Lewis was his own worst enemy, right? I don't even think Lennox Lewis is in shape for the Frank Bruno fight. You got the feeling at times Lewis was just operating on talent, not fitness. Right? I get the feeling Lewis was a little bit bored with the sport. Right? Just like Lennox Lewis was his own worst enemy. Just like Vitali Klitschko at times would get a little bit nervous in fights. He's high-strung for that Lennox Lewis fight. You'll notice at the end of the fight, he refuses to admit defeat. He's motioning to the crowd, almost causes a riot. He flat out panics in the Chris Byrd fight. Right? And of course, the guy who has the ability to beat Tyson Fury today is Tyson Fury, who's beaten himself in the past. right? Substance abuse issues, mental health issues, right? In the ring, sometimes incredibly bad judgment. Again, I don't understand the 12th round of the Deontay Wilder fight. If I'm fighting Wilder and I want to lose to him, all I have to do is drop my hands, make myself available for his right hand. Right? You want to know how bad off that sequence is. Fury actually gets hit with both of Wilder's hands. Right? He gets pummeled with the right hand as he's going down. He's open for the left hand. Right? Let me close by saying, if you want to see Lennox Lewis tested in a fight other than the Ray Mercer fight, and that's a must-watch, then I encourage people to look at his fight against Vitali Klitschko. As I see it, that's the only fight in the last 30 years between two of the top heavyweights over that stretch of time. Again, it's Lewis, Vitali, and in my opinion, Tyson Fury. That's how I see it. Let me hear from you. I hope you leave your comments in the comment section of this video. Thanks for stopping by.